Hello, everyone. Welcome to NewsNow Podcast number 5. I'm sitting here with Sophie Krouse, a GSS student, who gained some local notoriety a couple of weeks ago when she heinously decorated the sidewalk in front of one of our local banking institutions and had bylaw and police and a street sweeper nearly driving her over. So, we'll address that a little bit because a lot of readers had questions about some of that process. But I also wanted to give Sophie an opportunity to talk about, what motivated a high school student to do a solo demonstration. Would that be the right term? Or, some sort of a
demonstration.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so, Sophie, why don't you just give us a little background on yourself and the issue that was at hand that sort of precipitated the
action.
The action. That's a good term.
Yeah. So, my name's Sophie. I use she, her pronouns. I'm 17 years old at GSS, which we already covered. I'm an organizer with Banking on a Better Future, and we're a pretty new organization that's youth-based, that's trying to incentivize people to threaten to move their money from the big 5 Canadian banks. So that's RBC, TD, BMO, CIBC, Scotia. We're trying to get them to move their money to incentivize these banks to completely divest from fossil fuels, because we understand that fossil fuels are really bad for their carbon emissions, which contribute heavily to climate change. These fossil fuel projects are also having enormous impacts on Indigenous communities and the Indigenous land on which they impede on illegally. So we want to try to incentivize change within these banks' investment portfolios and get them to switch towards renewable, sustainable energy, and therefore switch to a more regenerative economy for the sake of our future.
So you mentioned it's a new group. Define new. Say.
It started on April 1st.
Okay. Well, that's new.
Yeah. Very new.
Okay. So how do you find out? How did you get involved? I'm guessing you were involved in other things, that there was a crossover or connection.
Yeah, I was originally, I started getting involved with a bank switch campaign in another group I'm with, Fridays for Future Toronto. This came about sort of late 2020, early 2021, so like January-ish. I started learning more about the bank's investments and how they had invested over $700 billion into the fossil fuel industry since the 2016 Paris Climate Accord, which is unfathomably large. And I was obviously shooken up because I bank with RBC, which is the worst out of the 5. So I felt very personally involved within the bank's movement, I guess you could say, and I've kind of just been doing work ever since. And then when I heard about Banking on a Better Future starting up just a few days before the April 13th action, I just joined the group, and I've been working pretty closely with them ever since.
So, forgive my ignorance on this, and there'll be probably significant levels of that depending on what we're talking about.
All that matters is that you want to listen.
Slight devil's advocate there, and I don't have any understanding of what varying policies of the banks are in terms of investment, but most people, I think, would agree about the direction of fossil fuels or climate change issues, things like that. But to go from A to Z with nothing in between, so because there certainly, I guess at this time, there's still a need for fossil fuels, but are any of the banks using, I don't even know if appropriate is the right word, but environmentally friendly targeting with their investments? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, some money's going to go into it. There's going to be, in any business, there's money to be made, but you could still do it smartly or with a proactive direction.
Yeah.
Do you see that anywhere?
So, what you just said made me think about a lot of things.
Covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. First of all, the banks do invest in environmentally friendly projects, but the way they do it is something we like to refer to as greenwashing. So basically, they'll put like a small fraction, like throw it into like, oh, let's plant some trees or let's start a recycling program. But all that these projects are doing is trying to better their image of being environmentally friendly to grow their clientele, because these environmentally friendly projects mean nothing when they're investing hundreds of billions into the fossil fuel industry. So it cancels it out immediately.
Yeah.
So the only reason for these investments is to grow their clientele. Also, when you mentioned switching from A to Z in terms of fossil fuels to like renewable energy, it can't be like that.
Well, no, I mean, from A to Z, I mean using fossil fuels to completely turning the tap off.
Yeah.
So there can be other investments in green energy and those other things, certainly working parallel or coming on stream to a greater capacity while these other things are going on.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is, this point in time, you can't just turn that tap off because a lot of things would cease to function.
Of course. Yeah. So basically, the kind of idea that Bringing Youre a Better Future and other divestment campaigns are looking for is a just transition, or what some people call a just recovery. So it's an extended plan. It would span over multiple years where we'd slowly make the transition away from fossil fuels by starting to invest in more renewable energy while compensating the fossil fuel industry. So all the workers, all the people who gain their energy from fossil fuels, putting heavy emphasis on compensating those communities, as well as the communities who have been affected by fossil fuel projects, like Indigenous communities in Canada. So by starting to do that transition, the fossil fuel prices will go up, renewable energy prices go down, and we can start to make that shift gradually. But no one can be left behind. And it's obvious that we rely on fossil fuels. Canada's the 6th largest producer of fossil fuels in the world. So it's not something we can just turn off, like you said, because so many lives depend on it. It's more so of a just transition away from it.
Yep. And do you see, and again, this is, you're talking bank portfolio information here, which I've never done any kind of a deep dive into, but they must also, just to be prudent on their portfolios, they must also be investing in green energy and things like that somewhere along the line.
Yeah, you would hope so. I can't say.
And I don't expect you to be an expert in that.
I don't know exactly the figures on it, but all that I know is that the investments that they make are infinitesimally smaller than the investments they put in fossil fuels. So it's
a bit of a bait and switch. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So that's why we're trying to get them to divest from fossil fuels and make robust climate action plans that involve that divestment strategy and how they're going to be involved in the just transition, starting to invest in renewable energy, compensating fossil fuel workers, such like that.
Yep. So let's just talk about the infrastructure of the incident, which I just describe it as infrastructure because having spoken to you about it when it first arose and subsequent to that, that day for you was not something where you just thought, I'm going to whip up a poster on some Bristol board and drop by and, see how things go. Yeah. You were prepared. You'd done your research. You found out what you could and could not do, what was appropriate, all those things. So if you could just maybe outline for that day, how did you prepare?
So there was quite a bit of prep, not just involving like the supplies I got together for like the postering, the chalking, my sign and stuff like that, and just making sure I was safe. But it also involved making sure that I was on public property anywhere I went. And that any of the posters and chalking I put up was on public property. So you can actually go, if you look up like your region or your town name followed by GIS, it takes you to like a government or regionally made website where it outlines public and private property with red and gray lines. Mm-hmm. So I double, triple, quadruple checked every spot that I was going to. I made sure I knew exactly where the property lines were, and I did not surpass those. So when I got the police called on me, they were trying to charge me with vandalism or like criminal mischief, I was completely blown away because I had prepared so much to make sure that what I was doing was legal.
So on that aspect of it, the aspect that they were confronting you about was a sidewalk message written in chalk.
Yeah.
on St. Andrews to the west side of RBC.
Yes.
So what did the message say?
That one on the west side said since 2016, RBC has invested $208 billion into the fossil fuel industry. I also did another one on the south side end, which said RBC is the 5th largest fossil fuel investor in the world.
Okay, so you weren't swearing at anybody or no cursing.
Both completely factual.
No president of RBC's personal cell number.
By extensive evidence. Like, I use credible sources. I'm not that kind of gal to just believe anything I see.
No, but for anybody listening, and if you remember the picture that we had in the paper, the sidewalk cleaning vehicle was right over top of the message, so you couldn't see what it said. So I just wanted to make sure that base was covered in case somebody thought you were doing something outlandish.
Yeah,
so,
no, it wasn't slander or anything like that. I wasn't trying to offend them.
Simple statement of fact stuff. Yeah. Right. Okay. So on the, you mentioned about public property, and that the sidewalk area, according to the regional GIS, which is something that the town uses all the time. I was just speaking with someone at town hall last week and said, "Oh, here, go check the GIS system, and that'll give you all the information you need." So you're 100% correct. Oh, they live by it for sure. So it's reliable and accurate. On the message itself, though, and you mentioned that you confirmed with the town what was and was not appropriate in terms of let's call it sidewalk art. It's up to anyone how they interpret that, right? But what did the town tell you about chalk?
Oh, like correspondence with bylaw? So the day after the protest happened, my dad actually took it upon himself to reach out to bylaw to see what the regulations were on sidewalk chalk. This is with Henry Bose, Boese, with bylaw. Basically, he says what mischief is, and the act of mischief is not covered by Town of Grimsby bylaw. It is covered by the Criminal Code of Canada in the following section. So mischief is everyone commits mischief who willfully destroys or damages property, renders property dangerous, useless, inoperative, or ineffective, obstructs, interrupts, or interferes with lawful use, enjoyment, or operation of property, or obstructs, interrupts, or interferes with any person in the lawful use, enjoyment, or operation of property. This is enforced by a police service, not by the Town of Grimsby Bylaw Department. With your specific question about writing on the sidewalk with chalk, it could fall under this definition. This would be up to a police officer to determine the criminality in each case. And then my dad followed up, "Thanks very much. For clarity, Grimsby bylaw would not prevent sidewalk chalk. However, police service may consider it. Correct?" Then he had to give him a gentle nudge because he didn't respond. He said the same thing, what mischief is. And then he said it would be up to the police officer to determine the criminality in each case. If you have any more questions or concerns, please let me know. So basically saying bylaw would not enforce it. It's up to the police officer to say what it is and what it isn't.
So not to harp on town bylaw, because they've had their own issues many times over of late. But if bylaw just had let it go because it wasn't an infraction as far as the town goes, it would have died right there.
Yeah.
Okay. So police got called.
Yeah.
Right? So what went on then?
So I'd say like 20, 30 minutes after I was out there, I saw police cars start coming down Main Street towards the bank from the east direction. And immediately I'm like, okay, who called the cops on me? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I knew it was for me, but I didn't want to believe.
It's sad that I'm laughing, but,
I knew it was for me, but I didn't want to believe it was for me.
I hear you.
And I knew because I'm young and, like, I know my rights
Well,
now.
you look threatening.
Yeah, I look terrible. I'd scare anyone if they saw me walking down the street. But yeah, so I'm young, I'm also a woman, so they think I'm easy to fool, like a vulnerable target. So this man pulls down his window. I'm like, "Hello, officer." I didn't know at the time that you have the right to remain silent, so I could have said nothing to the police officer this entire time. But I decided to talk to him. I'm like, "How's your day going?"
Well, you're setting the trap because you know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Honestly, any officer, male or female, for you, like, if I walk by and I see a high school student, I'm not going to assume. I didn't know you were as prepared as you were until I spoke to you.
Yeah.
I just thought, it must be a class assignment or something of that nature. Much more innocent. No, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean. I would have underestimated as well, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think most people would. But go ahead.
I think that is an assumption that most people make.
Yeah.
And you would think it's a point
wrong.
of weakness. You would think it's a point of weakness, but I actually think it's an advantage because when you do prove people right, it's much more powerful.
Yeah.
That's the way I like to see it. Anyway, so I'm talking to this officer. He says, we got called because of you. Like, you just vandalized this property. I'm like, what? It's like, this is vandalism. I can't make this up. He equated it to if I had spray painted on someone's house. I'm like, hold on, back up. This is on public property. He's like, no, this is city property. I'm like, right, so public property.
He just wouldn't know.
Anyways, he's trying to argue with me, tell me it's vandalism. I'm not going to argue with the cop. I'm like, okay, if it's vandalism, it's vandalism. And he's like, I'm going to charge you. And I'm like, okay. And then he walks away and he starts talking to the bank's people, which my mother was upset about because it's on public property. Why are they talking to the banks who have private property? Anyways, I think the big thing to take away from this situation is why were the police called in the first place? If a one-person protest with a girl who put up some signs with tape and chalked outside of RBC on public property talking about their investments had the 3 police cars show up and 2 bylaw officers show up.
Very cost efficient.
What does that say about the banks? How far are they going to go to try and silence people who are trying to bring about the truth about their investments? Like, think about what that means in terms of, like, the power I have.
Yeah, it's beyond comprehension.
I think...
As I was getting texts from Tristan filling me in, I'm like, no way. And then he says 3 cops. No.
It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
It's unfathomable.
And that's why you're here, quite honestly.
It's unfathomable. And, like, I really just think it really shows how far the Big Five, especially RBC, is going to go to keep their investments a secret. The other day on the May 7th action, I had a friend and a fellow organizer who was postering outside of an RBC branch near the Toronto area. The RBC manager asked her, told her she wished she would die. She told her she wished this girl would die.
So you mentioned about the banks and that. See, for me, and from what I see in any number of incidents over and over, in a local, even more painful way, almost on a weekly basis, you're not allowed to disagree with people anymore. Like, if I disagreed with you vehemently, I would still call you in and I'd say, let's discuss this. What's your side? Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily ever going to agree with you.
Yeah.
But you talk about it. I have no problem putting the information out there.
Yeah.
And if anybody from RBC wants to come and explain their banking practice, I'd be glad to have them in. I've said the same thing about Grimsby Council. I'd be glad to have somebody come in and explain things.
Yeah.
But you can't. If you disagree with somebody, cancel. You shouldn't be allowed to stand there on a public piece of property, destroying it with chalk. Like,
it's ridiculous.
And I don't mean to laugh because the whole thing was such a colossal waste of time and energy.
What else are you gonna do?
So anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I had to be okay with it because it did bring a lot of publicity to the action. So, like,
100%.
So
right?
many
like,
more
step
people.
Back and think about
yeah,
that.
So many more people showed up. Like, the police were there, and people were like, "Oh my god! Like, what's going
Excuse
on?"
me.
I was like handing out info packs. I'm like, "Take it! Like, here's what I'm here for."
We had to put you on the front page, almost getting run over by the street, street cleaner. It was comical.
But yeah, so I did use it to my advantage because I have the privilege to do so. But it makes me so angry because these banks have known about climate change. Climate scientists have known about the effects of climate change from human activity for close to 75 years, and they still do nothing about it, and they still invest hundreds of billions into these industries and try and hide it at the same time from people, youth like me, who will be most affected by these investments. It is the most selfish thing you could ever do. What if the RBC manager had come out to me, taken a notepad, be like, hey, I want to hear what you have to say. Like, I'm not sure what I can do about the situation, but I will give it to someone else higher up who may be able to help you. None of that. They are strictly just trying to hide their investments that are literally destroying the future of youth.
Well, from a local, and again, having seen many examples of this, from a corporate, first of all, you got corporate structure, and then you have local corporate structure. Mm-hmm. So a local employee of a corporation the size of Royal Bank, they have a playbook. If this happens, this is your protocol. This is what you do. If to some degree, I don't fault the person in the bank, because I can guarantee you, if something had ever happened and a TV camera showed up and there was a shot of you with an RBC logo in the background and and they hadn't followed their playbook, thanks for coming out.
Yeah. Corporate
mentality. Next up,
Yeah.
So, locally, it doesn't, it's not warm and fuzzy, but when you take some of the biggest corporations in the country and plug them into a small town, those two things don't always work. They don't play well in the sandbox, right?
Yeah, for sure. I
don't want to, I wanted you to outline what the situation was, outline the background there. Is there anything about your research or planning that you have not mentioned?
I could give you just more of a background on banking on a better future.
I want to go back to that, but I just wanted to make sure, because I didn't want to, I wanted you to just outline that you were prepared on that front.
I was prepared, and I also, when I went in and closed my account with RBC, I made such an emphasis, you guys have been great to me. The reason why I'm here has nothing to do with any of you or the work you guys do. This is because of the investments of the larger corporation that you guys are not responsible for, and they tried to stop me from speaking when they asked why I was closing my account. The lady was trying to shush me. It was awful.
That's strange.
It is strange, right? The treatment that organizers like me have been receiving from RBC branches is very unprofessional and very upsetting.
So, back to the organization and their goal of, I suppose part of the process is shining light on the amount of money that's getting invested into fossil fuels. But what is the end goal? Because, not to sound silly, but certainly not in my lifetime will banks have cut off fossil fuel funding.
Why do you think that?
Because the need is so expansive on a world scale. Mm-hmm. If they cut it back by 50%, in 20 or 30 years, that would be quite colossal.
Yeah, it would be.
So, like I'm saying, I can see it being a direction. And maybe I am not enough of an inventor / forecaster, but maybe it only ever gets to 20% of what it is now because there's less demand. It's all about supply and demand, right? What does society want? What things do they want? Because that's what someone will build a business. Because everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but most corporations, they're there to make money. That's why they're there. Mm-hmm. So if there's a way to make money and invest in green, that goes back to a conversation. Bill Clinton came to Niagara-on-the-Lake. Boy, what year was that? 2005 or 6? And we saw him at the theater there. And then he was saying the way for the world to get green was to monetize it, figure out how to make money, because corporations will flock to it if you can monetize green. So it reaches a tipping point where green can make you more money than fossil fuels then you see any business turn left instead of turning right, because they're chasing dollars. And I don't necessarily mean banks, like people who are looking to start a business or create a business. People need to make money to survive, but corporations have a piper to pay in shareholders and things like that, certainly when you're getting to publicly traded entities. And how they make money is irrelevant because they're beholden to shareholders. Find it, create it, drive it. So they're taking the most efficient path to money.
Yep.
And so Clinton's message there was, if you can monetize it, you will become that path. And that was pretty, you go back 20 years almost, and that was, and then you see the wind farm stuff start to go in, pluses or minuses on that whole situation. But, and there's solar's always been there, things like that. So I think that, I don't know if your group is being, I guess this will be my next question, is your group trying to light that path? Is there ways that you see or, I'm just trying to open the door on a different road there. How do you see business, and not necessarily banks, going down that road of getting green?
Well, I think there should be focus on banks, not just because they invest so much, but because that's what I'm here representing. But I think this is something that businesses in general continue to account, like say with their workers or anyone else. But if you're talking about taking the monetary path, like you said, like monetizing green energy to like build incentive to switch, what if thousands of bank clients collectively decided at once to threaten to move their money from their banks unless the banks pledge to make a strict plan for divestments from fossil fuels? And if they don't make this plan, thousands of people will be removing their money from these banks, causing an enormous loss of wealth in these banks, therefore decreasing the amount they can invest in fossil fuels. That's kind of how I picture our method of monetizing green investments, I guess you would say, but I don't really want to use that kind of vocabulary because that's not what we're doing. We're trying to create a sort of cultural shift in the banks that makes them realize that this generation will not tolerate fossil fuel investments.
A bit of shock therapy, if you will.
And if they do, they're going to lose their clients and the money they can invest. So it's basically giving an ultimatum of invest in green energy or lose your client base.
Yep. So it's two, so I understand. So what I was suggesting, though, isn't the mandate of the group. It'd essentially be two different groups. You could have another group that's, trying to drive other programs or whatever, but that you just made it clear for me that's not what this group is. You're just using a different sort of a mandate of using awareness on supporting institutions that are basically using a policy that you don't like, and showing them that the potential impact to that.
Yeah, and we're targeting youth especially because even youth without a bank account or just youth right now, they are some of the prime targets for banks because they're a possibility of future wealth for them, future investments. Yeah. So by targeting these young people who have bank accounts or maybe don't have the privilege of having autonomy over their own money, or children who don't have bank accounts yet, if we can get them to pledge to not invest in these banks, that'll create a huge incentive in the future for them to divest. What we're trying to do right now is collect and mobilize people who are willing to move their money so we can create that cultural shift.
Yep. So with your group, if maybe you want to give out some information on if someone wants to find out more or get in touch in some way to find out.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for mentioning that. So basically, if you guys are interested in getting involved, go to bankingonabetterfuture.org. There you can find so many resources, including the pledge. So basically, when you sign the youth pledge, we ask that no one below the age of 13 signs, but it's not legally binding. But basically, when you sign the pledge, you're pledging to either switch your account or open an account with an alternative institution if the big five don't make meaningful commitments to climate justice and divesting from fossil fuels. And when you sign that pledge, you'll be part of our mailing list. So we can email you about future resources and upcoming actions and stuff like that, so you can stay involved with the campaign.
Just a question, because I'm not familiar.
Yeah.
So if there was a 14-year-old high school student that wanted to get involved, because they're 14, do they need to let their parents know that they're signing up? Is there if you could explain any of that, or that some people might wonder.
The way we've formatted the pledge is anyone, like, we ask people no younger than 13 to sign, but anyone can sign. If you don't need parent permission, it's, like I said, it's not legally binding or anything like that. It's basically...
Well, usually, especially parents would be more concerned about a name showing up on an email list or other...
It's anonymous.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's anonymous. So you don't see the signee names.
Yes.
You can just, I think...
Important to explain.
Yeah, so it's anonymous. And basically what it means is when you have the capacity to do so, you will move your money unless the banks pledge for climate justice and fossil fuel divestments.
Understand.
So it doesn't need to be immediate. I think our target right now is that signatories will move their money on April 2022, Earth Day of 2022. So I think it just depends on the number of signatories and when we want to do it, but anyone can sign the pledge, and I highly encourage you guys to do so, because you can get involved with a campaign that you have so much power in to create a systemic shift that we need to create a livable climate future for us.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to mention? I think we've, as far as I know, covered everything, but I don't want to have left something out for you.
No, just young people have power. You can make change, and just sign the pledge, basically, is all I'm trying to say. And I
understand the Green Party is looking for a candidate in this area. So if you're interested, I can hook you up with the person who...
That would be lovely. I'm going to school in Quebec, so that might not be the best.
You could commute.
I can commute. Yeah, but thank you.
Where are you going?
I'm going to McGill.
Very nice.
Yeah.
What are you taking?
Environmental sciences.
Shocker.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's great.
Thanks.
Great school.
Or some kind of sustainability program, like arts and science.
Very nice.
It's off topic. Sorry.
All good.
But youth need to know that they have power, especially in a campaign like this. This campaign is for you, and this campaign is for your future and the lives of so many other across the world.
But honestly, on the awareness end, though, there's lots of people like me that it's, I'm not paying attention because I'll say adults tend to have more distractions. Youth have different distractions, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of old people like me that are finding out things that they didn't know.
Yeah, a lot of people are finding that. When I tell them these things, even me, until about 4 months ago or 6 months ago, I had no idea that the banks were using my money to invest hundreds of billions into fossil fuels. I think it's really shocking for a lot of people, and I think that shock factor is what helps us create mobilization. And just because, I just want to make sure, just because it's youth oriented doesn't mean that older people cannot sign. We want everyone to be included. Everyone can sign the pledge, no matter what your financial situation is.
Is the group a youth group, or is it a issue group, if you know what I mean? It's an issue group driven by youth. I get that, but maybe clarify that?
It's just a youth-based group. We're trying to build our networking a little bit, especially in making educational resources for financial literacy and just helping empower young people, high school students. So it is youth-based, but the issue affects everyone.
Sure. Great. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Right. Well, thanks, everybody. Number 5 in the books. And we'll have something new for you next week. Thanks for taking the time to spend with us.
Bye.